Good afternoon. My name is Sue Walensky, and I am both a member of the West Side Democrats and the Democratic Party of Bernalillo County, which are the two co-sponsors of tonight's training event. I am speaking to you from my car because, believe it or not, I just got off of Paseo del Norte coming home to the West Side, and I was in a traffic jam, and they said it would take an hour and a half to get home. It's been a long time since any of us have had a traffic jam on Paseo. That being said, I will give you the welcome tonight, and I will introduce our speaker and our chat box moderator and give you the lay of the land. Tonight we are providing actually two training sessions. We got two for the price of one, free. Margaret Lovell, an activist in the county and elsewhere in the country where she has lived before, has developed a way to communicate with neighbors in your precinct who might be willing to get involved in the campaign and get out the vote for November. She's found a way to do this using the NextDoor app, and she's going to take you through the steps, step by step, of how to do it. And there will be time for questions. And when you have your questions, please write them in the chat box that you can see at the bottom of your screen. We will be using the chat box for all communication, as all microphones, except for Margaret's and the moderator, who tonight will be Ellen Copeland, the chair of Westside Dems, since I am in my car. And when you write a question, please put a question mark in front of it as well as after. And if you're just making a comment or answering one of Margaret's probing questions, just write your response without a question mark. That will help Ellen to be able to discern which are comments and which are questions. Some ground rules for tonight. This is a Zoom webinar, and I don't know how many of you have participated in a Zoom webinar so far, but you will be able to see Margaret on screen, our presenter, and I think Ellen, our moderator. I'm not sure about that point. And as I said, everyone else's microphones will be muted, and we will be communicating through the chat box. The first training, using the NextDoor app to organize in your precinct, will begin as soon as I am done with this introduction. And that should last about 40 to 45 minutes, depending on the number of questions we have. We will take a 3-minute break at that point, and then we will go into the bonus training, which is recruiting block captains. And this is a much shorter training, about 15, maybe 20 minutes, again, depending on the amount of questions. And the two dovetail because they all stem from the organizing list that you will make when you compare your NextDoor app list to your VoteBuilder list. So with that being said, I welcome you this evening, and we'll turn the training over to Margaret and the moderation over to Ellen. Thank you, and have a good session.
Thank you, Sue. So I'm Margaret Lovell, and I got interested in using NextDoor to organize when I was living in Georgia. We were there from 2013 to 2017. And I was a precinct captain for John Ossoff, who was running for Congress at the time. He was special election going for Tom Price's seat after Price had been moved up to, I think it was Health and Human Services. Anyway, I wanted to give away some yard signs. And so I posted on NextDoor that if anybody wanted a John Ossoff yard sign, they should just let me know and I would drop one off. And there was a huge uproar about it. Some of it pretty nasty, but most of it just, we don't want to use NextDoor for politics. So I understood that. I gave away some signs and made some new friends and decided that when it was time to begin to organize my precinct here, I'm a precinct chair, precinct 530 up in the foothills. Excuse me. And I wanted to find a way to use NextDoor that didn't create a problem for my neighbors. And so that's what this presentation, this first presentation is about. Okay. All right, so I have introduced myself. I've told you how I got interested in using NextDoor to reach the voters in the precinct. I think we're ready to start. Okay. So in any of the trainings that we do with the party, we are supporting key Democratic Party values. So we are fighting for a better, fairer, and brighter future for every American, and rolling up our sleeves and getting the grassroots voters out. And we are organizing everywhere to take our country back. And I think that's particularly apropos with the two presentations we're going to have this evening using NextDoor, and then also recruiting or enlisting block captains. So another slide, Ivan, if I may. So we're going to learn how to create a NextDoor group. We're going to identify targeted members. We're going to figure out how to get out to them, reach them, and then we're going to figure out what we're going to do with them. Let me ask you here, how many of you are precinct chairs? And are any of you looking for ways to contact individuals in your precinct? And if you would use the chat box for Ellen, I'd appreciate that. And now, Ivan, let's move on to the next while those answers come in. So this is the process that we will follow if we want to use NextDoor to build up our precinct contact list. If you're not already a participant, please join. And then we'll talk about how to create the precinct group. We'll define it. We'll identify the participants. We have to get a VoteBuilder list for the precinct, and the fresher that is, the better. So we'll talk about what are the right ways to do that. And then there's just a method of cross-referencing the two lists, and you'll see, yes, I'm not sure if you'll see a slide on using an Excel spreadsheet in this particular deck. I did it by hand, but that's because I'm not exactly a Luddite, but I'm happy with paper and pencil. So, but I know Sue used Excel, and I think there's an example of her work in here on that.
And Margaret, you asked the question of who is a precinct chair. I'm a precinct chair, I think. And Sue is a precinct chair, and Flora responded that she wants to help chairs, ward chairs, find precinct chairs.
Perfect. And Flora, thank you for that, because I know that my ward chair is, I think she got two of her precincts, two of Liz's precincts were divided into, were doubled, basically, they were split. And then we have some folks who, for various reasons, are leaving as precinct chair. So it's encouraging to hear that that there's going to be a process for helping the ward chairs build out the precinct chair list. Can I have another slide, please? So here's the outreach on NextDoor. We start out by sending a message to the names on this list that we're going to create, and then we check responses. People who respond positively, and I haven't had anyone who responded negatively. I had a bunch of people ignore me, but I haven't had any. It wasn't like the original NextDoor where people were flaming me. So you invite them to join, and you go back and invite them again, and you invite them again, and we just keep doing that in the hopes that, and this has proven true, that I got the majority of the members to my private user group in the first mailing that I did, first set of messaging, and I've done several subsequently, and each one has brought new members in. So let's look at the next slide, please. All right, so here we're into the nitty-gritty of how this works. So if you are on NextDoor at all or familiar with NextDoor, you're going to recognize this sort of white panel in the middle with the red arrow as the left navigation panel on the home page for your NextDoor account. And you will see that down there in the groups section, it says Precinct 530. That's me. I opened that, created that group. And I did it again because NextDoor discourages you from doing politics on the main page, but they give you an opportunity to create a private user group. And I took that opportunity to create one to do very specific political outreach. Next slide, please, Ivan. So how to do that? NextDoor makes it very easy. At the very bottom of that white panel that we had on the last slide, it says help, little tiny help down there. And so you click it and then you get this, hello neighbor, how can we help? This kind of gray box. And I typed in create a group. And it brought me to a page which showed me, told me how to create and edit a group. Now I cut off the bottom of the screen. I think it actually goes down to like 7 items, but basically the instructions for how to do it are included in what you can see here. So pretty simple, very easily, very well laid out. We can thank NextDoor for all of that. May I have the next slide, please? So you have to set the boundaries for your group, and you want them to match your precinct as closely as possible. So where there's a red arrow leading in and a blue arrow leading out, that little box, the little arrow, the red arrow points to map. And that's what I'm showing you, is a part of the map of my neighborhood. My neighborhood is called the Cibola Addition. I am fortunate that my neighborhood on NextDoor is a street for street match with my precinct. And I was working with one of my fellow precinct chairs up in Ward 28C Saturday. And we found that hers is pretty close, but not quite right. But she knows all the streets in her precinct. And so she is able to get close enough to know which streets in NextDoor are also streets in her precinct. So I would try pulling up the map first and see if you get lucky and you're like me and it's perfect. And if not, the map at least shows you what is included in your neighborhood in NextDoor, and you can match it to your precinct map as well.
Margaret, can I ask a question? This is Ellen. Can you hear me?
Go ahead, Ellen.
Okay, sorry, I didn't know if you could hear me. My question is, are we restricted to the names that we can give to a group?
Okay, I lost my internet connection totally there for a second. So I heard the question beginning, are we restricted to? And then
using certain words when we name our group. Are there any restrictions?
No, I didn't see any restrictions in the NextDoor instructions. And I was very careful when I began this process. I very carefully read the community guidelines, the NextDoor community guidelines, to be certain that I wasn't going to stub my toe on a rule that I wasn't expecting. I didn't want to do this work and then find out, oh, sorry, can't do that. So the community guidelines are pretty clear about what you can and cannot do. And there wasn't any information about how to name your group. Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome. So somewhere along the way, I have lost the view of myself. So I'm just going to have to assume that you guys can hear me for sure. And that's really all you need to do. Alrighty, can we get the next slide, please? All right, so now we're going to talk about how do you create this list of NextDoor contacts or your neighbors to do this outreach. Next up, please. So you obtain a list of Democratic registrations in your precinct sorted by street, and we'll talk about how that happens. So you request a VoteBuilder list from your ward chair. That would be the first place to go. A fallback would be the VoteBuilder service team, but my understanding is they've got lots going on. So best if you could work with either your ward chair or maybe there's a precinct chair, a fellow precinct chair who has access to VoteBuilder, or maybe you do. So what you're looking for is a list of the Democrats, we'll talk about the Democrats first, in your precinct. And you want them by street, sorted by street, because that's going to make it easy when you get to pulling a list from NextDoor. So you want to do by street. This little privacy panel, so this is just an example of a page out of my precinct. You can see I'm Bernalillo 530. And I just put a little privacy screen over their names. So let's look at the next list, the next slide, please. All right, now here, if you want, and I did want, I wanted to go after the declined estates, the Greens and the Libertarians as well. So again, working from VoteBuilder, you can write a query that you get to pick party, and I did that. So you can see that this is a list, again with a little privacy screen. These are mostly declined estate. There's a Green up top and a Libertarian around in the middle. And they are going to get a different request from me, but they're going to be invited to join the same group, Precinct 530. How many of you have used VoteBuilder before? Let me just ask that question. I'd just like to get a general idea of your familiarity with it. And if you would know where to get the list from. All right, so I'm going to move on. Ellen's going to capture those answers. All righty, now you want to find the list of neighbors in your neighborhood, also sorted by street name. And here's the way this works. So once again, you're looking at the that left nav panel where the leftmost red arrow is, where it's pointing to Cibola Edition. That is my neighborhood. And if you slide your eye down that panel, you will see where neighbors is in a slightly bolder face. And so that's what I clicked on to get to the body of this screenshot. And it says at the top, neighbors, leads, businesses, and then it says sort street name. And you have, I think, 4 choices: last name, first name, street name, and newest. So sort by street name, because that's going to match the VoteBuilder list. Because when you get your VoteBuilder list, you're gonna create it as a walk list. Ellen, how are we doing on the folks who know about VoteBuilder?
Everybody, all of the attendees have used VoteBuilder.
Sweet, okay. So if you have built lists that you know, then you can build them to do different things. You can build call lists, you can build walk lists. So if you build a walk list, you're going to get them sorted by street name. And that's what I would recommend that you do. Any other questions up to this point? Let me just ask that. Let me just pause for a minute and just see if everybody's, I see something is sitting over in the Q&A box. Ellen, can you see that? Down at the very bottom on the same 2 over from the chat box.
You're asking about the Q&A?
Yeah, there's a number showing up in there which would indicate there might be a question sitting there.
No, it's not a question, it's a comment. It's from Cheryl saying she's used VoteBuilder a lot.
Oh, great. Okay, perfect. Alrighty, so if there aren't any other questions up to this point, let's move on. Now, this is the belt and suspenders way to do this. I made a list of my neighbors and my Democrats in my precinct. And I wrote them down, and I wrote down their addresses. And then the little check marks that you'll see on the side of the privacy panel is how many times I have emailed these people or messaged these people. And I will show you some examples of what that messaging looks like. So I built a list that has all of the Democrats that are in my neighborhood. And then let's look at the next slide. I built a comparable list for everybody who's declined to stay Green or Libertarian. And if we're lucky, we're going to have the next slide, which is going to show what an Excel spreadsheet could look like. For those of you who don't want to do that, there you go. So Sue did this. Sue did this. She created a spreadsheet for the comparison of the NextDoor neighbors to the Democrats in VoteBuilder. So however you're comfortable creating that list.
Margaret, we have a question.
Yes?
Are all of the people actually on NextDoor, or are they just neighbors? They have to be signed up for NextDoor, correct?
That's correct. That's correct. Yeah, they're not, because there's a woman catty-cornered to me, and I just double-checked her. I saw her outside yesterday, and I thought, I wonder if she's in NextDoor. I wonder if she's a Democrat. She is neither. So you are only accessing the people who have signed up for the NextDoor app. All righty, let's move on. So how are you going to reach out to them? You've built your list. Let's look at the next slide. and you're going to create text for this first communication. And you'll see that I have 2 blocks of text, one specifically for the Democrats and one for these third-party neighbors. I don't expect you to read the whole thing, but basically what it says is the reason I created this group is because I don't want to offend our neighbors who don't want to see anything political on the main pages. And what we're going to use this list for, we're going to create a special group, and I'm going to send you information that is specific to political activities, including candidate debates, forums, volunteer opportunities, etc. And then at the bottom is the ask on how you can join. If you want to join, just search for Precinct 530 in NextDoor's group section. Or you can just let me know you want to join and I'll invite you. So I've given them my email address, but they can actually make the request to join inside the message that I send them in the NextDoor app. And to the Greens, Libertarians, and Declined Estates, I thank them for being a registered voter and tell them that I understand not everybody wants to belong to a party and what that means, just that they don't get to vote in the primaries. And then I tell them mostly that what they're going to hear about is Democratic issues, but I'd still love to have them join. Next slide, please. So once you have your text developed, so now you have your list, you know who the folks are, and you've got your text, then you want to send them the message to invite them. And so the little red arrow above the number 1 in the sort of middle panel in this screen is the messaging icon. And then once you open it, you get this little box, a little dialog box for composing your message. And this is where you will actually communicate to the people that you have identified on your list. Can we look at the next slide, please? So here's an example. This one happens to be one that's going to one of the Declined Estate folks. You begin by just typing in your neighbor's name, and it'll finish filling it in for you. And if there's more than one Gail, you just make sure you get the right Gail. And that didn't happen all that often. There were 90, by the way, my original list of Democrats, there were 90 Democrats in my NextDoor app neighborhood. So that's how many of these little messages that I send out. And then there's a subject line, that's the second red arrow, country above party. That seemed appropriate for the independents. And then the text, and then hit send. And I will tell you that NextDoor has some sort of limiter on how many messages you can send out in a given amount of time. And I have never been able to determine, is it 25, is it 72? It seems to vary, and I don't know if that's because somebody is actually sitting at a computer going, whoa, she sent too many messages, and then stopping me. And then after a delay of a few hours, I usually would just wait until the next day, and then I'd go back and hit the list again.
Margaret, we have a question.
Good.
From Flora. She wants to know how many Declined Estate, Greens, and Libertarians have joined your group?
1. Just 1. But that doesn't mean I give up on them. I keep trying. And I don't know if you noticed, but I pointed out to you all the little check marks every time I'd send it to the Dems. I had 3 at that time when I did the screenshot. I think I've sent it 4 times now. But I actually have the papers right here. Hang on just a minute. See? Papers. And I have sent to the Declined Estates just twice. Maybe 3 times, but I think just twice. So I keep going back. I'm retired. I can do this. Politics is my life. So, all right. So let's look at the next slide. Okay, so following up with these prospective members, let's move on to the next one. So just as I said, multiple messages over time. So I've sent 4 messages to the Dems, 2 to the Declined Estate, etc. Each message has the same block of text, but a different heading. So I've used civic engagement, amplifier voices. I don't remember what other ones I've used. Country above party. And for one to the independents, I went Bernie. So I think that may have been the one where I actually got somebody to join. The goal is to get an engaged group of people who I can then call on to support me in precinct level activities, like if we were going to get to canvassing, phone banking, and postcarding, and block captains, etc. So I just keep putting the message out. Can I see the next slide, please? So there's just an example of varying just the headline. Okay, another one, please. So when you get a new neighbor, it gets a little tricky now, but NextDoor will tell you, Rich joined the Cibola edition. And then you can go into VoteBuilder and try to find Rich and see if he's a Democrat. And if he is, you send him the message. And if he isn't, you don't, obviously. I mean, unless he's a declined state. But for every new, and this has happened, I'll go turn back to my pages here. This has happened 4 times. I've gotten 4 Democrats that have joined since I started. I started this in January. So since January, I've had 4 new neighbors who are Democrats, one of whom accepted my invitation. So it's worth going after it's worth going after your new neighbors. Okay.
We have a question, Margaret.
Okay.
Flora wants to know, do the messages go to both email and through a NextDoor internal messaging system?
Only internal messaging system in NextDoor.
And then Cheryl asked, can you ask people to register, if you can register them to vote?
I could. That's not the purpose of these initial messages, but you certainly could do that. However, I'm working with voters because I'm pulling out a VoteBuilder. Everybody that I'm reaching out is already a registered, either a Democrat or a third party. Now, I could have used it to ask people to go get their absentee ballot. But there is another place to do that, but only, I mean, you can put that kind of information on the main page. Nobody's going to get upset with you if it is a completely nonpartisan matter. So you can absolutely say, have you asked for your absentee ballot? And I suspect somebody has. If it wasn't me, it will have been somebody else in the NextDoor family. Oh, wait, it was me. I sent out a post to everybody saying, have you gotten your absentee ballot yet? And I got 50 some responses, and they're still coming in. People saying, I haven't gotten mine yet. And this was just after May 5th when the county was mailing them out. So I put it on people's radar. I was curious because I hadn't gotten mine yet. And I really wanted to see if my neighbors were getting it. So that is absolutely something you can do on NextDoor. It's just partisanship that they're not interested in. So let's move on and see what's next. Group content. So this may be an appropriate place to talk about making sure that they're going to vote. So let's look at the next slide. So examples of content. And you can see the list there over on what's my left. I guess it's yours. And you can see what content can look like too. So these are just screenshots from posts that I put up in my special group, my Precinct 530 group. And I try to post in there fairly often. It's not my biggest activity politically, but I try to post in there fairly often just to keep people, just to refresh people with that this exists for them. Let's see what's next. Members can add content. And this is my buddy, Vicky Farrar, who was my predecessor as precinct chair up here in 530. Members can post. I own the page. And so should a member post something that is inappropriate, I can take it down. If someone should decide to get in and just be a nuisance, want to join in order to be disruptive, I can take them out. So I own the page, and as such, I can control it. I think it's important. I have not only Vicky, but I got a woman named Josephina who likes to post on here, and she's terrific. So the members absolutely post their own content. I just kind of keep an eye on it. Next up, please. Summing up, we've reached the end. Can I see the next? So does it work? Yeah, it does. So before I started this activity, I had a few emails from people, names and emails, maybe some phone numbers, from people who had attended various ward events or had shown up at a candidate forum or something like that. So when this slide was done, I had done 3 rounds, and I got 19 people, which is a slightly bigger handful than I started with. And that one member from the DTSGL group. I keep trying to build the engagement, and we'll really know if it works when I start calling on these people to start doing some activities on behalf of the party and our candidates. I think there's a resource page coming up. Could we see the next page? Yes, resources. So I'll give you just a second to glance at these. My contact information is at the bottom, phone number, and the email address that I use for this work. So let me ask again, are there questions?
Yes, Cheryl has a question wanting to know, when did you first start this list?
I think the first, I could probably pull up NextDoor and check it out, but I think it was the end of January. Because my second, and I say that because my second, might have been early in February. My third email, or my third messaging out was on February 23rd. So it has to have been January, because I would not do them any closer than probably 2 weeks together, 2 weeks apart. So probably sometime in January.
And Flora says, thank you, Margaret.
You're welcome, sweetie. Stay tuned, because we're going to do block captains next. I think there might be, yep, there's that. And then I bet you there's a thank you slide. Yes, okay. We're going to talk now about recruiting block captains. So you've seen this before, and once again, we're talking about organizing everywhere to take our country back. And my hope is that the block captains will provide some support for me in doing that in House District 28. So we're going to talk about what does a block captain do, at least as far as I'm concerned. It's not going to be the same thing as Richard Daley would have had it be, but it's what I'm going to do. Want to identify potential block captains by using VoteBuilder. I'm going to create some turfs to make it manageable for those people. And then I'm going to select block captains and invite them. Next slide, please. So this was the process. I'll give you just a sec to look it over this. Because we're going to get into this in some detail. Let me ask, has anybody been a block captain? Let's look at the next slide. We'll see if anybody answers, Ellen.
No response yet.
All right. So block captains will share the responsibilities of the precinct chairs. These are people who may already have existing relationships with their close neighbors. They can concentrate their efforts on a smaller group of people, smaller even than the precinct. They may also have networks that extend beyond the precinct. And I like to think of them as the bench for future party officials and activists. So I think if you can get folks engaged, and we may all remember what this was like. We might not have been block captains, but at some point we sat down at a phone bank and made a call for a candidate or for an issue. And that may have been the very first thing we did. I think, I'm trying to remember, before any of that, I was living in the central coast of California. I was living in Paso Robles, California. And there was a guy named Kevin something, Doyle, let's say, who was running for city council. And I knew him through some other activity that I was involved in. And I started going door to door. It was my first door knocking for Kevin Dolan, and to be a city councilman. And that was the beginning of my political engagement. So maybe block captains, it's a stepping stone, let's say that. All right, next slide, please. All right, now, y'all have said that you're familiar with VoteBuilder, so this is going to be a pretty familiar screen to you. You're going to recognize this. So you'll see over there on the left, home district, I put in the county and I put in my precinct. You don't see it, but you slide, if you were to slide further down on this, this screen in VoteBuilder, you would see party. And so in this instance, I picked Democrat, only Democrat. So remember that when I was doing the NextDoor, I had two separate lists. I had the Dems and then I had the third party folks. So here you're picking your precinct and Democrat. And then you come to voting history, which is also further down on the same screen. And I selected 8 elections, 4 general, 4 primary, and the little box that's buried under the red arrow says at least. So up there it says, include anyone who did at least 4 of the following. So out of those 8 elections, generals and primaries, I wanted people who had voted at least 4 times because I wanted to build I wanted a high frequency voter, basically. Somebody who was pretty engaged in voting and in voting as a Democrat. Next slide, please. So then you're going to cut turf, and the little security blue speckledy panel down there shows a bunch of names that are the registered Democrats in my precinct. And the map, you know, VoteBuilder gives you a map, excuse me. I wanted to make these real manageable for the people that I was going to pick to be block captains. So if you look at the legend, you will see that Turf 3 has 12 voters in 10 houses. That's very, very reasonable. Now Turf 5 looks like 46 voters in 38 houses. That's a little bit bigger. But I have 7 turfs cut out of my precinct, very walkable neighborhoods. I looked to make sure that I wasn't having anybody dead end on any particular street, or, you know, I'm bounded by Candelaria and Manal, so it wasn't, and Tramway and the foothills. So I wasn't going to have anybody cross a busy street, but that would be something that you would want to consider when you're creating these turfs for these block captains. Let me pause here just see if there's any questions.
No questions.
All right. Let me just say that just because my criteria were, you know, 4 out of 8 and Democrats, there may be other criteria that you would want to add into your block captain selection. That seemed kind of minimal and sufficient for me to do that, to make those criteria choices. Next slide, please. Thank you. So over there on the left, you can see I've built a list. It's called Active Dems Turf 01. And I built that list. And then over on the right-hand side, that's the list with the little security panel. There are 21 people in Turf 1, 21 high-frequency registered Democrats. Next slide, please. So now you got to ask them to be a block captain. And so once I had that list of all of those people who were by the very basic criteria, my very basic criteria eligible, I wanted to pick people that were like me, because I wanted to make an ask that said, you and I have something important in common. And I wanted there to be more than one thing. I wanted it to be more than just we're Democrats and we vote. So the people that I picked, my first round of choices, are women ages 55 to 70. That's the bracket that I'm looking at. And I sent this letter. And the letter says, you're a high frequency voter, so am I. I took civics in high school, maybe you did too. I say, I can remember the Great Society, Johnson's Great Society, and you and I hoped that change was coming under Obama's leadership. And then I list a few dreadful things that we lived through, like Watergate, Iran-Contra, trickle-down economics, non-existent weapons of mass destruction, and the Great Recession. And now we're in the midst of COVID-19 and the heartbreaking and infuriating crisis that is the Trump administration. And then I say that for most of my life, I've done a little something for Democratic candidates in all the general elections. And I say, I'm looking for women in our precinct who want to help keep New Mexico blue and send a Democrat to the White House. And then here's the ask, will you consider being a Democratic Party block captain? And then I tell them what that might engage, what might be involved in that. Delivering yard signs, hosting a postcard writing party, telling folks about our candidates, delivering campaign literature. Maybe we get to walk, maybe we don't. But together we can figure out how to do this. And then I give this woman, I think it was 7 women I wrote to, I give the woman what her block would be, what she would be captain of. And I give it to her by streets, sort of a bounded street. So Casa del Norte from Candelaria to Lillian Place was just an example. And then I tell her how to get in touch with me. And then I provide a little urgency. I say, I am eager to get the team in place so that we can hit the ground running as soon as possible. And if you're not interested, please let me know that too. So the letter includes a connection. You and I have something important in common, a specific ask, will you be a block captain, and some urgency. I'm eager to get going on this. Next slide, please. So if your first choice doesn't respond to the letter, call her. I actually texted her. I got one response right away. Yes, I want to do this. I'm eager. Let's do it. I got 3 women who said, one simply said no, nicely, but no. One whose husband is sick, and she said no, she can't. And one who said she has just had a boatload of stuff going on, but she'll be ready in September. So I don't want to wait till September to get her as a block captain, but I'm not going to forget about her either. So with those 3 declines, I went back to my list. I'm going to pull something up. Hang on a second. I want to show you something. So this is turf 6. This is turf 6. And these are the VoteBuilder pages of the voters in turf 6. There's my little map with my dots. And I went through for each of the turfs and I circled the people that I wanted to ask. And then the one I most wanted to ask, I put a little star by her name. And that's the person, that's the woman who got my first request, that letter. Won't you please do this? And then for the ones that I hadn't heard from, so 1 yes and 3 no's, so whatever that left me out of 7, 3. So I texted them and I said, I haven't heard from you. Are you interested? One of them was a landline. So I had to, actually, she was one of my next door neighbors, or one of my neighbors in NextDoor. And so I messaged her through NextDoor. Now this just happened a couple of days ago and I haven't heard back yet. I don't expect to immediately. But, well, here's what it is. I want you to visualize a VoteBuilder walk list. You've all seen those. Now, you know that they have on them the name, the address, the gender, the party affiliation, and the age. So what I was showing you was the VoteBuilder list from turf 6, how I had gone through, I had found the women. So what I was showing you was a VoteBuilder walk list with names circled. That's all I was showing you. It was a nice little visual aid, but without the camera, it's pointless. So anyway, so the point of this slide is, and Winston Churchill said it really well. I would have preferred to have found a quote from Eleanor Roosevelt, but Winston Churchill makes the point. So I'm not giving up until I get 7 block captains. And if I can't get exactly what I want, a woman between the ages of 55 and 70, I will find somebody. There is no turf that has fewer than 12 eligible people in it, 12 candidates in it. And I believe that I can find a block captain for every one of those 7 turfs that I cut. That would give me 7 block captains to support my efforts as precinct chair. Let's look at the next slide. Resources. I think this is a repeat of what we had at the NextDoor, on the NextDoor presentation. And again, my contact information. I think next we just say comments and questions. Next slide. Yep, questions and comments. So Ellen, are there any additional questions? And thank you for letting me know you couldn't see anything.
None so far.
Okay.
People, a couple minutes. I just want to say this has been a fantastic, fantastic presentation. It's really been useful. I've